as if he was standing on Fifth Avenue with a gun.
Now, if you can believe it, many in the media, they're now saying President Trump actually obstructed justice because he tweeted out his opposition to all that has happened with no evidence and criticizing what is a witch hunt. In other words, telling the truth.
The White House and his attorneys, again, they say, oh, no, this is just what the president thinks. It's First Amendment. He's not you. He's not me. He's the president. He has control over these probes.
The president's tweeting out to his attorney general that he should end this travesty, the Mueller witch hunt. And then you hear the clucking little nasty voices from the left.
And with his former campaign chairman Paul Manafort on trial for fraud, Trump brings more media attention to the case by saying he's being treated worse than Al Capone. We'll debate that and much more with Corey Lewandowski, the president's former campaign manager. A war of words erupts between the president and New York Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger, and then with NBA superstar LeBron James. Is Trump scoring points or just committing fouls? And as the crowd screams at CNN's Jim Acosta, the network accuses the president of whipping up an anti-media frenzy. Plus, with CBS chairman Les Moonves fighting for his job after serious sexual misconduct allegations, one of his network's own stars speaks out.
I like working for him, but accountability is meaningless unless it's for everybody, whether it's the leader of a network or the leader of the free world.
How Stephen Colbert, who's usually busy mocking Donald Trump, is taking on his own boss. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Mediabuzz. President Trump has been denouncing the Robert Mueller investigation for many months now. But this week he caused a bit of a media explosion by ratcheting up his rhetoric with a tweet aimed at the one official who has recused himself from the Russia probe. This is a terrible situation, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor. Jillian Turner, a Fox News correspondent and former national security official in the last two administrations. And Capri Cafaro, a Washington Examiner contributor and former Democratic Senate leader in Ohio. Molly, even if we accept the White House argument that the president is just offering his opinion, he's suggesting that his attorney general blow off the fact that he recused himself for ethical reasons. So is the media storm around this justified?
It's certainly good to talk about this issue, but I do think we need to have media people who understand how Donald Trump speaks. It's understandable that 2 years ago they didn't quite understand his rhetoric, but now after 2 years of seeing him speak in public, seeing his tweets, you would expect them to understand him a little bit better. He is expressing a great deal of frustration with a probe that has sidelined his administration for a year and a half, and he is the only person who seems to be talking about it, where everyone else in Washington, D.C. is pretending like it's okay that what's going on. Everyone else not just being politicians, but people in the media who are not holding Mueller himself accountable. They think their job is to cheerlead for him instead of to ask questions such as, what is the scope of his probe? Why has he not cared about the Hillary Clinton campaign's involvement with Russia? Why has he not found any evidence of collusion with the Trump campaign, which is the thing that we were promised by the media? So we're not seeing good media coverage, and we're not seeing good media understanding of how Donald Trump speaks.
But Jillian, for a president who is constantly now complaining about the witch hunt and the unfairness of the Russia probe and it's a hoax and all of that, doesn't he create a tidal wave of coverage about the very story he hates every time he does one of these tweets, and particularly this one invoking Sessions?
Well, Howie, there's this old adage, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's something along the lines of no coverage is bad coverage, or
all publicity is good publicity.
Bad coverage is better than no coverage.
Yeah.
I think President Donald Trump is definitely an adherent to that rule.
But he can be covered on every single subject under the sun, and he keeps coming back to the Mueller alleged witch hunt.
And this is one of the things where I think the media is doing a really great job. The mainstream fake news media writ large is doing a great job of often pointing out to the president, hey, why do you ever tweet about anything other than the economy? Why do you ever tweet last week about anything other than 4.1% GDP? It seems you're derailing your own agenda. You don't need to create. You're already the most widely covered president in the history of this country. You don't actually have to create more news.
The underlying issue with the Mueller probe is one that's actually favorable to Donald Trump. So again, we were promised that we would find treasonous collusion with Russia to steal an election. To say we haven't found that is a huge understatement. I think he likes reminding people of that.
All right.
Well, okay, but we were promised by the media, as you mentioned earlier.
Yet.
Let me just
we have
jump
to wait
in.
till the findings are released before.
But that's what people say. We need to wait, and yet how long do we have to have an administration be sidelined? I think he's asking very good questions, and the media should be discussing them as well.
And they don't necessarily need to be sidelined. I mean, just because that's what the media narrative is doesn't mean that they shouldn't continue to do the work that they're doing.
All right, I want to ask you this question, but first I want to tell our viewers that I interviewed Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, this week, and he told me it was just opinion, no presidential order. But I asked him, well, he named Sessions, and Rudy Giuliani said that he was talking about the generic Justice Department, and of course it would have to be his deputy Rod Rosenstein who would shut down a Mueller probe. Are the media buying the notion that these tweets are just opinion and that he's just venting when he has used tweets to announce policy?
I think that there has been a lot of scrutiny on this, as we were talking a little bit earlier. I think that on one hand, there are some in the media that understand sort of the nuances of Donald Trump, that, you know, he does get frustrated. He takes to Twitter. He sees something. He reacts. And that's not necessarily policy or meaning anything. But because of the nature of this, because there's all this discussion surrounding obstruction of justice and the fact that he is the president of the United States, as we saw in that clip from CNN with Cuomo, that, you know, he's not you, he's not me, he's president of the United States. And what he says and when he uses his words, they matter.
All right, we can all agree he's not you or me or anybody else. So the Paul Manafort trial taking place across the river in Alexandria is getting ample coverage, of course, given he's the former campaign chairman. But Molly, it's about alleged bank fraud and tax evasion. It pretty much has nothing to do with Donald Trump or the campaign.
I think this is a prime example of what we were just talking about. So everyone's interested in this trial as part of this collusion theory with Russia. But the prosecutors have said they make no plans to bring up Russia or anything related to Donald Trump as part of the trial. That should cause some pretty good questions in the media about why the special counsel is handling this, whether this guy who may or may not be guilty or shady is also the victim of a political prosecution. But we're not seeing anyone actually asking any of these difficult questions of the Mueller probe. They just seem to trust it implicitly.
But again, Jillian, the president takes to the Twitter and he says, who was treated worse? Al Capone, legendary mob boss, killer, public enemy number one, or Paul Manafort, you know, who worked for Reagan and Dole, who I barely knew, and again, driving attention to a trial that already was being covered, but maybe not being covered, you know, constantly.
I think that was an instant classic Trump tweet this morning, in the sense that the president loves to do these sliding scale, everything's comparative, everything is subjective kind of tweets about people that get wrapped up in the probe. The first thing he did when it was first announced that Mueller was that Manafort was indicted, was he was kind of accosted by a gaggle outside of the West Wing, and he said, "Oh, well, what Paul Manafort has done is not nearly as bad as what other people have done, like Hillary Clinton." This is the thing that he likes to do.
This is a great example, though. If you are actually trying to investigate collusion with Russia to steal an election, should you not be asking some questions of Hillary Clinton, who secretly had a British spy get sourcing from the Kremlin to inject into the last election, weaponize it with the intelligence agencies, disseminate it to the
media? Can we go back to the actual Manafort trial? Yeah. If we can just go back to the Manafort trial for a minute, because it really doesn't have anything to do with Russian collusion. Right. And I think one of the things that Trump has put in his tweets is, you know, this basically he's trying to get out there that a lot of basically everything that is in this trial predates Manafort's relationship with the Trump campaign. So I think that he's trying to get that out there, and that is not necessarily getting covered. One thing that I do find interesting is how popular culture has latched onto this Paul Manafort trial. You know, everything. Vox actually did an entire thing breaking down the Al Capone tweet. Then you see Esquire talking about it, Glamour magazine.
$15,000 ostrich coat.
Exactly.
The lavish lifestyle. I want to turn now to the president. Last night, he's held a number of rallies in recent days. This one out in Ohio. What do you have to say about certain cable news networks? Roll it.
MSNBC is so corrupt. It's so disgusting. So disgusting. The guys that we love, right? They're blowing them away in the ratings. Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, Steve Doocy, Ainsley, Ryan.
So back to you, Capri. Calls MSNBC corrupt. That's a word I haven't heard before. And I'm not sure it helps Fox when he praises the opinion host like that, because it suggests the entire network is alive with him. And that's not true, certainly, of the news division, but certainly the president rooting for some of his favorite hosts.
Sure, I think that it just continues that narrative that there is a preferred network, that may have a specific bias and everyone else is fake news. I do want to point out, I actually just saw this right before we went on air, that there was just a recent survey of 4,000 viewers that actually, interestingly enough, show Fox News as number 2 as the most trusted news by most American viewers that were surveyed. Number 1 was BBC, number 3 was PBS. So I think that says something about the viewers and how America sees MSNBC and CNN as well.
The president is now attacking the press, I would say, virtually every day. And he used the word disgusting at a Pennsylvania rally. And this morning he tweeted, they purposely cause great division and distrust. They also cause war. They are very dangerous and sick. Is that over the top? Also cause war?
Well, this is why I think the best way to hold Donald Trump accountable as a media organization is just to cover him straight. Because when you behave in such a clownish fashion, as so many people are, where they're just open and honest about how much they view their job as resisting him, it gives him the ammunition he needs. He's not going to back leading information, that they do it to pursue an agenda, which is obvious because every time they make a mistake, it breaks in the anti-Trump direction. So this is going to continue until such time as the media take their jobs more seriously and start just covering him straight.
Well, I would say Trump's attacks resonate with some of the American people. And just briefly, Jillian, so Ivanka Trump was interviewed by Axios, and she said that, well, she didn't like some of the inaccurate reporting about her. I do not feel the media is the enemy of the American people. She sort of broke with her father. Trump then tweeted about it, President Trump. She correctly said, no, it's the fake news that is the enemy of the American people. But he defines that as including New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN.
Well, and there's a reason that the president gets pushback on those kinds of comments from the left and from the mainstream fake news media, as he likes to call it, and not from Republicans, lawmakers on Capitol Hill, other government officials. It's because I think a lot of this comes from the idea that the president is expressing a frustration Republicans have widely had since the Reagan administration and have not been able to verbalize in quite the manner.
Let me get a break here ahead. Corey Lewandowski weighs in on these and other media controversies. But when we come back, the president goes one-on-one with LeBron James and CNN's Don Lemon. Do these battles make any sense?
Mediabuzz is brought.
President Trump throwing a body block at LeBron James after the NBA star said this in an interview with CNN's Don Lemon.
That he's kind of used sport to kind of divide us, and that's something that I can't relate to.
Trump tweeted that LeBron James was just interviewed by the dumbest man on television, Don Lemon. He made LeBron look smart. Molly Hemingway. So the president's counterpunching here against LeBron's criticism, and Don Lemon, who attacks him on the air every night. But does it make sense for him to be brawling with an NBA star and a cable news opinion host?
No, it's a puerile tweet that a lot of people don't like to see their president going after athletes. They also don't like to see athletes going after their president. We see a little bit of unevenness in the coverage. But I felt kind of bad. He really gave it to Don Lemon, and a lot of people in the media, including some of his own colleagues, only focused on what he said about LeBron James. Maybe both of them needed a defense.
Right. Capri, Lemon then took to Twitter and wrote, "Who's the real dummy? A man who puts kids in classrooms," this is LeBron's effort in Akron, Ohio, "or one who puts kids in cages." Should a cable news host take the bait and directly denounce the president of the United States, even though he clearly detests the president of the United States?
Look, I mean, as Molly said, I mean, he's always, Don Lemon is always kind of, resisting against Donald Trump every night on CNN. But if the tables were turned, I mean, Don Lemon is giving some Trump to Trump. He's sounding just like him. And, people praise Donald Trump for saying, he's not, if he has his back up against the wall and you challenge him, he's going to fight back. That's what Don Lemon did. Is it potentially in poor taste? Probably, but okay. I get it.
Interesting footnote, a dissent from Melania Trump, her office issuing statements saying, looks like LeBron James is working to do good things. First Lady encourages that because he's trying to help at-risk.
We welcome her to Akron.
Okay. Oh, that's right. You're from Ohio. You get to say that. All right. So New York Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger has a private meeting with President Trump. It's supposed to be off the record. The president tweets about it, says we talked about fake news, and then Sulzberger pushes back. So, Jillian, The mere fact that this meeting took place with the failing New York Times, does it not suggest that the president really does care about the opinion of his hometown newspaper?
Well, there's no doubt in anybody's mind that the president cares about the opinion of the mainstream fake news media because he talks about it constantly. But the more important thing with this meeting is that it underscores something I love to talk about whenever I'm covering the president's foreign policy, which is that he really does believe fervently in the power of his own interpersonal skills. If he can just get one-on-one, face-to-face with all these people that are critical of him, he can make them see the light and get them to understand him, whether it's Kim Jong-un, whether it's Vladimir Putin, or whether it's Sulzberger.
I've seen him do it. He did it with Karl Rove during the campaign in a green room. So Sulzberger is a 37-year-old new publisher of the Times, Molly, put out a long statement saying that he told the president that his rhetoric was dangerous. I warned that this inflammatory language is contributing to a rise in threats against journalists and will lead to violence. Now, I understand him wanting to defend the paper, but do you think that that goes a little too far?
I think there are two problems with his statement. One is that if inflammatory rhetoric causes violence against people, I think the media should be thinking about their inflammatory rhetoric against Republicans, which we have seen in recent years have led to actual shooting of congressmen, other threats on people's lives, people getting arrested routinely. If that's true, even though I think personally that people are responsible for their own actions and you can't blame the rhetoric, then the media have a lot of hard questions to answer. The other thing is, he says Donald Trump's rhetoric is dangerous and divisive. This week, the New York Times hired Sarah Jong on their editorial page. She is a virulent racist.
We'll talk about that later.
And they defended it as if it's not a problem. They need to hold themselves to the high standard they're holding others.
And in short, there are two sides to this debate. So then finally, the president comes back with a series of tweets, and one of them, Capri, is when the media, driven insane by their Trump derangement syndrome, reveal internal deliberations of our government, it truly puts the lives of many, not just journalists, at risk. Very unpatriotic. What do you make of him using that word and revealing the secrets of government? That's gone on since the founding of the Republic.
Well, I think we've come up with a new Trumpism, which is the Trump derangement syndrome. I suspect we're going to continue to maybe hear that from President Trump and his tweets going forward. I think that this back and forth between the account of what happened in this private meeting between the New York Times and President Trump is emblematic of basically the huge debate we're having as a nation. Who do we trust and who do we believe is telling the truth? The President of the United States or the mainstream media, in this case, the New York Times?
Yeah, I would just add that reporting on government behind the scenes, if it's the EPA or the HHS, both of which whose leaders were fired as a result of that reporting, that's not unpatriotic or a bad thing. Capri Cafaro, Jillian Turner, Molly Hemingway, great to see you this Sunday. Ahead, CNN and Jim Acosta say the president is whipping up crowds against him, but is he to blame for every cursing protester? And up next, the media spent months writing John Kelly's political obituary, only to find out he's still alive and walking around the White House. Anyone following the media coverage of John Kelly would have been convinced that the White House Chief of Staff was toast, that he was history, that the four-star general was about to be cashiered any day now. I'm told the president asked Kelly what they were going to do about these stories, then asked if he'd stay on for the rest of the first term. And when Kelly said yes, Trump said, we need to get this out. Once Kelly shared his plans at a staff meeting, word immediately leaked, first to the Wall Street Journal and then to other media outlets. But what does that say about this media drumbeat based on unnamed sources? The AP. It's all leading White House staffers and Trump allies to believe that Kelly is working on borrowed time. Wall Street Journal. Trump consults on successors for Chief of Staff John Kelly. ABC. The president has once again started contemplating his possible replacements.
And a source telling CNN Trump is talking to friends about possible replacements for Kelly.
From well-informed sources in the administration that White House Chief of Staff General John Kelly may be preparing to leave his job, likely very soon.
We do have people close to the White House telling us that Mr. Kelly's departure could come as early as this week or could follow the president's mid-July trip to Europe.
Back in April, NBC News reported that Kelly was likely to leave by July 31st, noting that Kelly had repeatedly or reportedly referred to Trump as an idiot.
The date is approaching when he is going to be leaving, whether it's by his own choice or by President Trump deciding that he's had enough.
Now, a few caveats are in order. Trump's decision to keep Kelly doesn't invalidate the stories that his influence has dwindled. That's pretty evident from the way the White House is run. It doesn't knock down stories that Kelly has vented to others about wanting to leave or that he offered his resignation after that furor over Rob Porter and domestic abuse allegations. It doesn't even nullify stories that Trump was seeking advice about potential successors. And yes, of course, Kelly might not make it through 2020. The president could even change his mind next month or next week. But it's a reminder for the media that even those who work for this president don't always know what he's going to do, and that using sources to predict what he'll do and dismissing the official denials is risky business. Coming up, Corey Lewandowski on the coverage of the president, who's constantly been battling the press on Twitter. And later, with a crowd yelling and cursing CNN's Jim Acosta, we'll talk to the reporter who pressed Sarah Huckabee Sanders on the issue. Many media controversies swirling around the president, from the Mueller probe to the Manafort trial to the angry anti-press crowds. Joining us now from Manchester is Corey Lewandowski, Donald Trump's former campaign manager, now with Vice President Pence's PAC. And Corey, I've covered Donald Trump since the first day of the campaign, when it was basically you and Hope Hicks. I've covered the mutual warfare with the press. I've never seen the president so resentful of his coverage and so consistently using such language as unpatriotic and enemy of the American people. You're a political strategist. Is this a strategy that's working for him?
Well, Howie, I think, and look, I don't speak for the president, but I think on behalf of him, his frustration with the mainstream media, when you look at the coverage of one historic event that took place this week, was almost nothing. We had U.S. soldiers' remains being returned back to Hawaii after the Korean War conflict. Mike Pence went over there. MSNBC didn't cover it. NBC didn't cover it. Most of the major media outlets didn't cover it. And I think it's frustrating for this president, for what he's doing on behalf of the American people, to get so little credit on something that's so important. He has to go out and talk about his own message, because he knows if he doesn't do it, nobody's going to do it for him.
Right. I said on the air this week that was a mistake. It was an emotional issue. It's also tied up with the nuclear negotiations, and only Fox News carried that press conference live, or that ceremony. But when you say he has to go out and talk about his agenda, increasingly beating up on the press, he has every right to do that. He thinks the coverage is unfair. It is overwhelmingly negative. But increasingly, with the possible exception of the Mueller investigation, that has become his agenda. And so what is he gaining out of the pounding every single day?
Well, Howie, if you look at the recent numbers that have been put out, the plurality of the people now no longer believe that the press is fair to this president. 90% of the media coverage of this administration has been negative from an unbiased source. And you look specifically at the network coverages, and this company delineated each individual television network and who the American people believes is the fairest. The BBC is number one. I think Fox is number two, and all the way towards the very bottom, or almost at the very bottom, was CNN, because there has been so biased against this president. 4.1% growth rate in GDP, the lowest unemployment for Hispanics and African Americans, and most importantly, Howie, the Rasmussen poll that said that the president was receiving almost 30% of the African American support in this country. That is unprecedented. And if that was Barack Obama and he was a Republican, they'd be touting this. He's up 15 points in the last 18 months of this administration, and he gets absolutely no credit from the mainstream media. And I think for him, it's very disturbing, because he has moved things in the right direction for this country, and he doesn't get the credit he deserves.
The people who don't like the president already don't like CNN and MSNBC, but the tweet this morning saying fake news can cause war, and they are very dangerous and sick. I mean, how do you explain that kind of inflammatory language? I understand your point that you feel that the president has gotten some accomplishments and that they're being barely covered, if at all, by elements of the mainstream media, but causing war? What's he talking about?
Look, Howie, I think when you go back and you look at the meeting that President Trump did leading up to Kim Jong-un in North Korea, right? The press said, number one, he would never be prepared. Number two, this is a disaster. This is never going to happen. This is not something that he should be doing. This takes months to negotiate. And a tangible outcome of that discussion was the return of American soldiers who were left behind after the Korean conflict, the Korean War. Moreover, we are closer to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula than we've ever been, and this media doesn't want to talk about that. So can it cause war? Sure, in the sense of this, in the hyperbole of they are creating a narrative that the president isn't qualified to go and have these conversations, and other world leaders see that, and they take exception to it.
All right, well, I would just point out that the summit with Kim Jong-un got enormous coverage. A lot of the tone was negative, but that's not exactly the same thing as causing war. And there's a way to go, obviously, in that negotiation. The White House would acknowledge that. So the Mueller investigation, also the subject of many presidential tweets. Look, it's been over a year. He thinks it's a witch hunt. The press is obsessed with the Russia collusion situation, allegations, I should say. But every time he tweets about it, and particularly the president tweeting this week that Jeff Sessions should do something about it and shut it down, he just drives more coverage to this story.
Well, Howie, you have to look. The president knows very clearly that Jeff Sessions has recused himself from this investigation. I heard Speaker Gingrich on this network talk about the fact that 90% of the items that Jeff Sessions has recused himself regarding this incident, he didn't need to. And I think that's probably true. And so, look, the president knows Jeff Sessions is not going to end this investigation, but I think it's also fair that the president has said this has been going on for a year and a half now. There is no collusion, no cooperation, no coordination between the Trump campaign and the Mueller team. And if there was, it would have been brought to light by now. So let's bring an end to this investigation. Let's let the country move on, and let's prove once and for all that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and anyone in Russia to impact the outcome of the election, because that is the fair thing to do, and the president wants to see this come to a close.
Right. Now, Paul Manafort, the former campaign chairman, on trial began this week for bank fraud, allegations of tax evasion and lying. He, of course, replaced you as campaign chairman back in 2016. Given what we know now, millions of dollars from Ukraine, that he was broke at the time and trying to maintain a lavish lifestyle, do you think that personnel move, just hiring Paul Manafort, was a mistake on the president's part?
Oh, look, of course I think it was a mistake. I think I should have probably stayed till the end of the campaign, in full disclosure, Howie, because I was doing a pretty damn good job winning primaries and caucuses around the country. But look, that decision has, now happened, but here's where we are. I'm not a fan of Paul Manafort. Whatever he did had nothing to do with the campaign, had nothing to do with his tenure as working or volunteering for the Trump organization. But let me ask you this. Is he getting the same treatment that every other American would get if they were accused of the same thing? And look, I'm not a Paul Manafort fan, but I look at this objectively. Would somebody else be locked in solitary confinement in a federal prison for tax evasion charges when they were never audited by the IRS? I don't know the answer to it, but it does call it into question. And this has nothing to do with Trump. It has nothing to do with his tenure here. And the media scrutiny around Paul Manafort is at the highest levels because for a very brief period, he was associated with the campaign. And I think if you look back on it now, Paul probably realizes it was a big mistake to come to the campaign. And it's not a crime to be rich. And the federal judge who was appointed by Reagan has said this many times. It's not a crime to spend $100,000 on a vehicle or spend $1 million on suits. Right. You're entitled to do that, but you have to pay your taxes on it. And it's incumbent on the government to prove that Paul didn't do that. And if he didn't do it, then he'll be held accountable. But this judge is right by the book. He's very fair, and I think Paul's getting a fair trial.
Well, I'm going to agree with you that this trial, if it was just another lobbyist with the same charges, wouldn't be getting anywhere near this attention. It does seem to have nothing to do with the campaign. The reason he's back in jail is because the judge ruled that he violated the terms of his bail. Good discussion. Corey Lewandowski, thanks for joining us from New Hampshire. Good to see you.
Thank you, Howie.
Ahead on Mediabuzz, CBS Chairman Les Moonves, fighting for his job, is challenged by the guy he hired, Stephen Colbert. But first, news outlets say someone could get hurt if the president keeps attacking the press. A closer look at the protests against CNN.